of Pyathlon. Today we will be discussing data types and variables in Python. So we'll start by defining what a variable is. And a variable is essentially just a way to store a piece of data or store a piece of information. When you're programming, you're going to want to store some data or information that you can refer to in your program so that you can do some sort of operation or complete a task, and variables are how you can accomplish that task. So I know this can sound all abstract, so let's just go ahead and define our first variable. Now when you define a variable, you'll have three parts. You'll have the name of the variable, an equal sign, which in Python is an assignment operator, and then you'll have the value of the variable, which can be just a plain value or an expression. So let's start programming and see what this looks like. So let's say you want to store your name in a variable and your name is John. You can just say name, which will be the name of your variable, equals, and you can say John. But this won't work in Python. If you run this, you'll get an error. And it's saying John is not defined. And that's because in Python, if you want to store text, you need to store it in what's called a string variable. And the string just means text. So every time you want to store text, you'll be storing it in a string. And the way you tell Python that you want to store a string is you have to encase your text between quotation marks. Now in Python, you can use single quotation marks or double quotation marks. It all does the same thing. It doesn't matter. Let's say you have a variable and you want to see what the value of that variable is. You can do that using a print statement. Now you can pass a value, a variable, or an expression into a print statement and still see the output, and we'll do more of that as the course goes on. But for now, let's just look at the value of our name variable. So we'll do that by saying print, and then you'll have open and close parentheses. And whatever you want to see the value of, that's what you put between the parentheses. So we'll print name, and you'll see it says John here. One quick thing that I forgot to mention earlier, if you have some text, if you highlight it and then tap the quote key, so you can do shift, then add quotes, whatever you have highlighted will automatically be placed between quotes, and this works for single and double quotes, and that's just a quick way to convert something to a string in case you forgot to put quotes around it. So we'll just cut this out for now. So now that we've seen how to define a string variable and print it out, let's talk about some of the other types of variables you might expect to see in Python. So we'll make a new cell. And let's say you want to store somebody's age. Well, you could do age equals, let's say our friend here is 25. You could store age equals 25 and store it inside of a string, or you can use a different data type. So remember, strings store text. If you want to store an integer, then you would simply define a variable that contains an integer value. Remember, when it's in quotes, it's a string. But let's do this. Let's do age equals 25 without quotes. Now, we're using the same variable name here, and since this is called reassigning a variable, age used to be set to a value of 25, and since it was in quotes, it's a string. But now we're going to reassign age to the number 25. So now age will no longer be a string, age will be an integer. But before we run this cell, let's just add a new cell here. We'll use this type function, and we'll talk more about what a function is later. But if you do type, and then in the parentheses, age, it says age is a string. Alright, now let's run this cell here where we redefine age to be an integer. We run that, and let's do type age again, and now you can see it says int, which is short for integer. str is short for string, int is short for integer. And just like with any type of variable, you can also use a print statement and do print age, and it still gives you the output of 25. Now there are two more data types that I would like to discuss in this video. The first one, well, I guess the third one will be floats. And a float is just a decimal. So here we have age equals 25, and it's an integer. But let's reassign age one more time. And this time we'll assign age to 25.0 and run that. And now let's look at the type of age again. Now age changed to a float. Even though that 0 is mathematically equivalent to just 25, in Python, by adding this .0, you're telling Python to store this variable as a decimal, or a float as it's called in Python, so it's no longer an integer. And once again, since it's a variable, you can just say print age, and it gives you 25.0 as opposed to just saying 25 like it did when it was an integer. The final data type I would like to discuss in this video is called a Boolean data type. And Boolean can be hard to conceptualize, but it's a variable type that can only store the values true or false. So we'll make this variable, we'll call it Boolean underscore variable, and we'll set equal to true. In Python, the T in true is capitalized and the F in false is capitalized. So let's run that. And once again, we'll look at the type of this Boolean variable. And it says bool, which is short for Boolean. Remember, Boolean can only be set to true or false. And now we'll just copy it and paste it. And we'll paste it between the parentheses in this print statement. And you'll see that it gives us a value of true. Now let's copy this whole expression and reassign it to false. Its type is still Boolean, but when we copy and paste this print statement down here, now you can see its value is false because we reassigned it to false up here. Now I want you to notice that when I declared this Boolean variable, I put an underscore in here, which is something we haven't seen yet. But when you name a variable in Python, it has to be alphanumerical and it can include underscores. So you're only allowed to have letters, digits, and underscores included in your variable names. And there are some popular, they're called naming conventions, and there are ways you can name your variables, and I'll take you through 4 of those right now. So this variable here is called snake case, and I'll put that in a comment. We haven't discussed what comments are yet, but a comment is a way to add some text to your code, and your text is ignored when the code runs. So if I were to rerun this cell, this adding this snake case, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't affect the way your code runs. It's only there to inform someone who's actually looking at your code, so yourself or another programmer, either what you're doing in your code or why you're doing it, but they don't affect the way your code actually runs. But if you're programming on a team, comments are very important because they're a way to document your code line by line. You don't have to have a comment on every line when you're programming with the team, but you'll want to use comments with some degree of frequency. It'll make you a better programmer, and your code will be more readable for other people. So now, we've seen snake case. There's another one called Pascal case. In Pascal case, you capitalize the first letter of each word. So we do Boolean variable equals true. And this would be Pascal case. In all of these naming conventions, what you'll notice is we're separating words so that it's easier to read. If you don't have anything separating your words, then they'll all run together and it'll be really hard to read. So these naming conventions just give you a set of rules to use so that A, your variables are consistently named, and B, it's easier to tell where one word starts and another begins so that it's easier to read. And the next naming convention we'll talk about is camel case, and that's when the first letter of the first word is lowercase, but every other word its first letters uppercase. So that will look like this, Boolean variable, and we'll set it equals to false, and this is camel case.